right, terrific. So thank you, everyone at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center for making programs like 2G Tuesdays and Sundays with Survivors the success that they are. Thank you to everyone for being here this evening and for those viewing this recording. It's always wonderful to see so many new and familiar faces joining us. Thank you to my incredible parents, Eddie and Lori, for being the best and instilling in me to be the best I can every single day. And thank you to all of the survivors and their family members for sharing their testimonies with us, especially Peter Kind and his mother, Holocaust survivor, Margaret Kind, who are joining us this evening. Welcome to 2G Tuesdays, a program where children of Holocaust survivors share their families' testimonies with us. My name is Michael Mantell. I'm a psychotherapist, educator, and 3G, a grandchild of Holocaust survivors. In 2020, during the COVID pandemic lockdown, I reached out to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center about doing a one-time private event for friends and family to honor my grandparents, Alice Diamond and Mickey Mendelovich, from Satmar, Romania and Sighet, Romania. Sundays with Survivors was born. It was a way for me to connect with my grandparents and my family's history, to connect with others and introduce them to the living memory of the Holocaust and Holocaust education. Also, it was a way for me to combat the rise of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred that I experienced and witnessed. The event was so successful that we added another event and another and another, and ended up opening it to the public. And since, we've been going strong for almost 2.5 years. In 2021, we added this great program, 2G Tuesdays. And what started as an idea, my own promise to keep the Holocaust testimonies alive, has turned into something incredible, beyond what I could have ever imagined. To date, we've had dozens of Holocaust survivors and their family members share their testimonies, reached hundreds of people around the world, and raised thousands of dollars for the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. I'm so thankful to be a part of such an incredible and important endeavor, and thankful to all of you for being here, supporting these programs. Since our last meeting, we have unfortunately lost another Holocaust survivor, Boris Chardin, a survivor and founder of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. His passing and the passing of other survivors is a painful reminder of how important these events are. And I'm so grateful to be here, to be able to host these events, and grateful that you're all here to bear witness to Peter Kind's presentation this evening. In this program, Peter Kind is joined with his mother, Margaret Kind, a survivor of the Shoah, to present Margaret's story. Margaret lived in Romania until March 1944, when her family was sent to a ghetto. From there, the family was sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where Margaret's parents, maternal grandparents, and her brother were murdered on the night of their arrival. After 6 months at Auschwitz, Margaret and her younger sister were sent to work at a Volkswagen munitions factory, and then to a concentration camp where she was liberated by US troops in April 1945. At the end of this program, I invite all of you to ask your questions and share your thoughts during the Q&A portion. Please use the hand raise emoji if you know how to, or simply unmute yourself or write your questions and comments in the chat. Just 2 quick announcements. Many people made donations when they signed up for this program, and I'd like to thank you. Your generosity helps HMTC educate young people about the history of the Holocaust and its lessons through education and community outreach. If you'd like to support HMTC, I'll put a link in the chat to make a donation. Also, please save the date for the Yom HaShoah program called Seeking Shelter, a memoir of a Jewish girlhood in wartime Britain, featuring Cynthia Ehrenkrantz, which will be held on Sunday, April 23rd at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, I am so thankful for all of the survivors and their family members who share their testimonies with us. To organizations like the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center for making events like these possible. And again, to everyone who's here today for being a part of these programs and supporting HMTC. If you'd like to learn more about the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, would like to donate, volunteer, visit the center's museum, or inquire about their education and community outreach programs, please visit their website at hmtcli.org. And with that, I welcome Peter Kind and his mother, Margaret Kind.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for participating as I provide the testimony of my mother's life experience during the Shoah and its impact on her and our lives. I see a lot of friendly faces and friends, and I thank you again for joining. I'd like to thank you, Michael, for your dedication to survivors and 2Gs, and for facilitating the remembrance of these events for future generations to come. And I also would like to thank you for the opportunity to present this evening. I'd really like to give a huge shout out to Elise Friedman of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center for organizing, editing, probing, and compiling this presentation that you're going to see tonight. Elise, I would not be able to present tonight without your commitment and effort, which are much appreciated by both myself and my mother. My motivation for my remarks this evening is to present this testimony to pay tribute to my mother for her perseverance and her strength, and for my 3Gs, my kids, my nieces, my nephews, my cousins, so that they know the story and encourage all to speak out against hate. This PowerPoint was prepared for tolerance presentations to high school students prior to COVID. While each of the experiences presented in Michael's 2G program are different, they are similar in that atrocities were suffered by all, lives and families forever changed, and all are important experiences in spreading the word to fight hate. During the next 35 minutes, I'll tell you about my mom, who next month will celebrate 95 years, God bless her. And as you heard, she's zooming in tonight from sunny Florida. She's there with my sister-in-law, Jill, and my brother, Jack, who's somewhere in the room. While both my parents are survivors of the Holocaust, Dad's story was not documented. He passed in 1988. The Holocaust, defined as slaughter on a mass scale, or Shoah, which is Hebrew for the catastrophe, represents the most significant effort to exterminate an entire ethnic group, being the Jews of Eastern Europe. The German government leadership created a scapegoat, the people of Jewish descent, to blame for their national embarrassments, being World War I, economic distress, and their loss of national pride. The Nazis used politically motivated hate to rally its citizens and neighboring like-minded countries, and ultimately led to the murder of 6 million Jews, but also 18 million military deaths, including 11 million being Allied forces, 35 million civilians, including those rounded up as supporters of the Jews. So total estimates of World War II related deaths because of their ridiculous, idiotic objectives are from 45 to 60 million people. Please turn the slide. This slide is a map of Europe during 1928, and zooming in on that arrow is Romania, where my mom is from. So my mom, who was born Malka Newman, Malchi she's known to her extended family, or Margaret to people who have met her in the USA, was born in April 1928 in the small town of Leardina, located in the northwest of Romania in the Transylvania region, which, as many know, is home to Count Dracula. The countries to the east of Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy, were mostly aligned with the Nazis, while the countries to the west of Germany, such as the UK and France, were opposed to the Nazi movement. The Nazis' objectives was to basically conquer all of Europe and then conquer the world. And the Jews were part of their plan to exterminate them along the way. Before 1940, Leardina was a town of 3,500 people, both Christians and Jews, who lived together in peace and friendship. Today, the population is less than 2,500, and there are no or few Jews that remain. Next slide. My mom grew up in a loving family, mother and father and 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, and her maternal grandparents lived in an adjacent home. Grandfather Pesach was an early Jewish landowner, a right granted despite ongoing anti-Semitism when Jews were allowed to become full citizens in the late 1800s. Grandfather was a leader in the community. Legend has it that he was an ancestor of Salzwedel, who was king of Poland for one day, August 18th, 1587, during the transition of the monarchy. The first Jewish king of a European country, and likely that distinction remains today. Mom's dad was educated, studying in Vienna, which was not typical at that time, and owned a general store in Leordino. And Grandma Golda was a homemaker and a balabusta. My mom had a happy childhood with Jewish and non-Jewish friends and was treated as equals. Mom had a large and close extended family in the region, aunts, uncles, and cousins. Please note, none of the photos of Mom's childhood remain. There are no happy memories captured on print. Imagine your childhood being removed from history. The photos that we are provided tonight were saved by an uncle who survived the war in hiding near Budapest, Hungary. Yiddish, which is a combination of German and Hebrew and other languages, was spoken by Eastern European Jews in their homes and amongst themselves, and Romanian was spoken otherwise. Next slide. My mom often talked with love and pride of her grandfather Pesach Wall, who I am named after to honor his memory. Mom's grandfather was revered by the family for his wisdom and by the town for his generosity to the needy and the community. Education and observing Jewish traditions such as holidays, the Sabbath, maintaining a kosher diet, and family togetherness were at the core of the family value system. Grandfather Wall stressed the importance of education and kindness to others. Now let's listen to my mom talk of memories of her grandfather. And by the way, all of the video excerpts tonight were taken from a testimonial documentary made in 1997 as produced by Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. Michael.
He used to say that you have to share with everybody everything. And this is why when I grew up, I knew that if you have something, it never belongs to you, it belongs to everyone, because you never take everything away with you. And we lived with the Christian people. We were very good friends. The priest of the town was my parents' best friend. And since my grandfather was a religious man, he actually had his own synagogue, and the whole family prayed in that synagogue. And I remember as a little girl, when they needed a church, my grandfather was very willing and also able. He gave them the property to build a church because he believed that everybody has equal rights.
So my mom went to religious school in the early morning and Romanian public school afterwards. And they did not have school buses or cars back then, so bike or foot was how she got to school. My mom loved learning and reading and applied herself to excel and make her family proud. Let's listen to my mom discuss her memories of school prior to the Shoah. What a positive outlook towards attending 2 sets of schools. Certainly that was not my own childhood experience of going to Hebrew school afternoon.
At home, we had all sorts of books, Hungarian books and German books, and it was very, it wasn't so easy to have books like you have here. I think I used to read a book 2 or 3 times because it was so precious, and it was my favorite thing was to read books and learn, because I always knew you have to be something. I wanted to be a teacher. When I was, I think, 2nd grader, I already wanted to be a teacher. And therefore, there was a lot of pressure on me to be good in Hebrew school and in Romanian school. because I used to get up 5 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 6 when I was lucky, to go to Hebrew school for 2 hours before I went to Romanian school.
So here's a map of Leardina being part of Hungary. So as the arrow points, in 1940, Hungary annexed northwest Romania, and thus the local government was immediately controlled by a Nazi-friendly regime. Romania, which had been allies of Britain and France, ultimately sided with the Nazis in late 1940s. I suspect they had no other choice. But imagine one day you're a US or Ukrainian citizen, and the next day, without moving, you are forced to become a citizen of Russia. How frightening would that be, as things will change as a result of the new controlling government? In the case of Romania in 1940, one which was more friendly to the Nazi regime. Next slide. In early 1940, anti-Semitism was on the rise in Hungary and Transylvania particularly. Jews were being scapegoated as the cause of societal problems. There were few non-Jews to stand up against hate, since protecting Jews meant putting your own family at risk. Here's my mom describing a memory of one of her early experiences with anti-Semitism.
When it started out with being anti-Semitism, I was sort of struck by it. I couldn't understand why people wouldn't like me because I'm Jewish, or why my friends would just really, one of them actually once, her name was Maria Hasheshiu, spit in my face because there was a lecture in school for which I was better prepared than she was, and I was dumbfounded that just because I'm Jewish, I'm being used as a scapegoat or so.
By 1942, the Hungarian Jews were no longer able to attend public schools, and therefore my mom and siblings were homeschooled. At the time, my mom was 14. By 1943, the Jews in the region were forced to wear yellow stars on their clothing to identify themselves as Jews. This was intended to dehumanize and humiliate the Jews and to break their spirits. In other parts of Europe, the stars were required as early as 1939. In wearing a yellow star, you risked and feared being beaten, and it made it easier to round up the Jews to export them elsewhere when the time came. Mom remembers that they were aware that Hitler was no friend to the Jews, but with censored radio and newspapers, information flow was limited, and Mom says they did not know of Hitler's plans to exterminate the Jews. Even if you wanted to leave for friendly countries, there were quotas that limited immigration, such as the US, Britain, and even Palestine. According to my mom, her father viewed the Jews as intelligent people and did not imagine that they would hurt the Jews. By the time they realized something was going on, it was too late to leave. Let's hear what my mom has to say, Michael.
Well, actually, we were now wearing a yellow star on our sleeves, and so therefore you were a subject if you were going on the train. You were a subject to being taken off the train, being beaten on the train.
I find this also perplexing, how there could not have been rumors of Romanian pogroms, ghettos, extermination camps reaching my grandparents. While I know it's hard to leave a home on a rumor, did they contemplate leaving, or did they just hope and pray that this terror would pass? Throughout Eastern Europe, Nazis herded Jews into ghettos, which were confined areas used to speed up the elimination of Jews by gathering them to be sent ultimately to their final location. By early April 1944, Mom, her family, and the Jews of Leardina were rounded up. They were allowed a small amount of their belongings, and they were sent by train 12 miles to Visay de Sus, a ghetto that you could not leave. Families were split up to wherever there was space. My mom was assigned to a small apartment with 30 other people. At 16, she requested and was assigned to work in the ghetto hospital. Life in the ghetto was difficult. There were no freedoms, limited food, and the uncertainty of their future was frightening to all. Evil of this scale requires consenting support by German citizens, whether in the military or as civilians, who persecuted and tortured Jews to protect their own lives and their families and to protect their social status. Germans taking up arms against their fellow citizens. It is estimated that 12,000 Jews passed through the ghetto in April 1944. Let's listen to my mom's comments.
The ghetto was in a part of the city where it was just a few blocks, and they had, I don't know how many, thousands of people there. They brought them from all over, from all the towns around the area. There, my aunt decided that I should go to work in a hospital because we had a friend who was a doctor, Dr. Stern, and he opened up a hospital for the ghetto, and they decided that if I'll work in a hospital, probably I will not go to labor camp, because they said that from there we will be divided to go to labor camp, but nothing will happen to anybody. The families will live together, except that the young people will have to get up every morning and go to work, and the older people will stay home and take care of the little children.
Next slide. Remember, I said persecution and humiliation of Jews was part of the Nazi plan. Why? Persecute, rally the national pride by blaming Jews for their problems, humiliate, make the Jews feel the hate, fear for their safety, break their spirits, and in doing so, the Jews were less likely to resist. One example of humiliation is the forced shavings of beards, which were typically worn by observant Jews as part of their customs. Notice the picture above in this slide, a Jew standing in the gutter, which was where they were forced to stay as they traveled through the ghetto, being publicly shaven for being different, humiliating and also painful as no shaving cream was used. Listen to my mom describe her recollection of her grandfather shaving his own beard to avoid the humiliation of the Nazis doing it for him.
And so I was able, next day I went to see my parents and my sister and little brother. And my grandfather was staying with them, and orders came, you have to cut your beard. And my grandfather was very, very upset. He was 72 years old, and all his life, most of his life, he had a beard, and he just sort of was embarrassed that they did that to him, but he cut it off, because if you didn't, they came and cut it off for you.
After 5 weeks in the ghetto, the 12,000 Jews living there were told to pack, and then they were sent by train to a destination unknown to them. The Jews were stuffed into train cars intended for cattle, and with limited food or water and no bathrooms, they were sent on a trip of 440 miles lasting 3 days. My mom and her fellow travelers were told that they were going to work camps and no one would be harmed. She had no idea where they were going. This was the last time she had a conversation with her mom and grandfather. Listen to her description.
But that was my last chance to see my mom's face and my grandfather. My mother came stood by the bridge because they stopped the train, and until we came back. And I was able to talk to her. The Germans even let me talk to her. I wasn't allowed to go up on the train. My grandfather wanted me to take good care on myself and eat no matter what they'll give, because he knew that I'm only eating kosher. And I think that's what he figured, that they're going to keep us alive. I don't know what he figured. My mom wanted me to go back to my hometown, and there were some people by the railroad station when they went to the ghetto, and mainly it was one person who was working for us for many years, and they were laughing hysterical, and she wanted me to go back and see her. please go back and see her. I want you to go back and see her if we ever remain alive. But no one really thought that this is going to happen because my mother was 39, my father was 43, my grandfather was 72, my sister was 13, and my little brother who perished there wasn't 11 yet.
So after 3 days, the train arrived at its destination, Auschwitz-Birkenau, Poland. They arrived at night. The scene was chaotic, darkness, a mass of people exiting the train, the German soldiers yelling instructions, and their German shepherd dogs set to pounce. There was a rancid smell in the air, which we now know was likely to be the burning of human flesh and gases. My mom had no idea that she was being sent to the most infamous of Nazi death camps. Listen to her recall a specific haunting memory from that night.
So the third day we arrived to Auschwitz. The whistle of the train has been something which every time I hear a train whistling like that, I get very sick to my stomach. The whistle, it was a very sad whistle. It wasn't like a whistle for a usual train whistle. It was a very sad whistle.
When Jews arrived at the platform in Auschwitz-Birkenau, they were taken from the cattle cars without their belongings and forced to make two lines, men and women separately. SS officers, including the infamous Dr. Joseph Mengele, would conduct selections among the male and female lines, sending most victims to one side, which was condemning them to death in the gas chambers. A minority were sent to the other side, destined for forced labor. Those who were sent to their deaths were killed that same day and their corpses burned in the crematoria. Those not sent to the gas chambers were taken to be processed and registered as prisoners. In the early years of the war, pre-1944, registration numbers were tattooed on their left arms so Germans could keep count. My mom and the others arriving in 1944 were not tattooed. Most prisoners were then sent to perform forced labor in Auschwitz I or some of the subcamps or other internment camps, where their life expectancy usually was a few months. During the chaos of the separation, my mom's mom, my grandmother, instructed my Aunt Rose, my mom's sister, to cross to the other line and join my mom's line. Rose was 2 years younger than my mom. Can you imagine how Rose felt separating from her mother? Scary and ultimately guilt-creating. And imagine my grandmother's concerns and her selflessness to act to protect her child. This act by their mom saved Rose's life. The rest of the immediate family, parents, grandparents, and my mom's younger brother were sent to the other line and likely died that night in the gas chambers. Auschwitz, next slide, please, Michael. Auschwitz was a sealed prison filled with Jews who did not know what was going to happen to them, but they quickly came to understand that many of their family were not as lucky to remain alive. Mom and her group were immediately taken to have their heads shaved, deloused, and given ill-fitted clothing from others likely no longer alive, all acts intended to humiliate. The prisoners were stuffed into barracks. Can you imagine waking each day not knowing your fate, knowing your life had forever changed and could be over at any moment a German soldier decided to shoot to kill, or some other torture they created, or just for their own amusement? Let's listen to my mom.
We arrived at night, so the panic was even bigger because it was dark. We saw people standing. They had, every few feet, they had a very tall little house, like it looked like a tree house, looks here, with steps to go up, and there were soldiers with their guns there, and also we saw wires. We couldn't understand what those wires are for, but those were the electric wires.
Lack of food, proper clothing, and hygiene resulted in much sickness and a likelihood not to survive, so remaining healthy was paramount. Food consisted of coffee at 5 a.m., soup for lunch, and that was often grass soup, and dinner was a piece of bread with jam or cheese. Everyone obviously lost significant amounts of weight, and illness was rampant. This again was intended to break their spirit and will to live. My mom recalls her aunt making a face blush from bricks, rocks, and urine to create a red, healthy look on your face to save themselves for selection to death. 6 to a bunk, no mattress, and crammed together, packed in like sardines, sleeping with your head to your neighbor's toes. Listen to my mom.
So we were shaven. Immediately our heads were shaven. We couldn't understand why. Actually, the braids were cut off separately and thrown to a separate pile. They shaved our heads, and they gave us a shower, and they told us when we got undressed to leave the shoes and the dresses where they are, and when we come back, we will find them. But when we came back, there was nothing there. There were no shoes there. There was some kind of a little dress. I had a little dress which probably would have fit somebody who was 10 years old. So I picked that dress up, and they said, put the clothes on. Mach schnell, that means make it fast. We put the clothes on. There were some shoes. Luckily, they fit me. My sister found her own shoes there. And we had a dress. I had no underwear whatsoever. We had nothing, just the dress and top. And from there, they put us into a line. We stood in line, and they marched us into this camp, which was in the middle of the 16 was, there were 32 barracks in every street. This was a street. We slept like herrings. We just, on the side, you could only sleep on the side, and the feet from the other person would come into this side. And so at night, if you got very, very tired, because there was boards only, there was no mattress or anything or blankets, and usually there was space between the lumber that was there, and it was very rough. So if you had to turn around, we would all get up once or twice in the middle of the night and get off the bunk and then go up and turn around.
So as I said, the Nazi plan was pretty simple: kill or exterminate all the Jews, either by murder, working them to death, or through starvation and sickness. Estimates are that 1.1 million of the Jews murdered in the Holocaust were murdered at Auschwitz, 1 in 6. The prisoners had to find their reason for hope for a better future and a return to pre-war life. Fantasy and dreams was one thing the Germans could not take away. Let's listen to my mom talk about make-believe stories of food and seeking justice.
In Auschwitz, when we were there, there was somebody with us on the bunk. Her name was Fliegelmann, Aunt Fliegelmann. And her daughter Eva, who was married the year before, arrived to Auschwitz with a baby, and they immediately took it away from her. And she was a very beautiful girl, and she was very melancholic, and her mother was afraid she'll have a nervous breakdown. So, and she was also very hungry, and she kept on crying to her mother that she's hungry. And Fliegelmann decided that every night she's going to cook something special. And so every night, it was a make-believe thing. Every night she would tell us, tonight I'm making balinces with cheese. And she used to make balinces with cheese too often. We told her that this is too often already. And she would assign us. One had to set the table, and the other one had to put the silverware. And she never wanted the same silverware or the same, she was a very wealthy lady from home, in the same tablecloth. And we all made believe and listened to it. And I want you to know that you could fall asleep and dream about food and really feel that you ate.
The next one, Michael, on the right.
And then after a while, my sister got very upset with the whole thing. And though she was 13, she would say she's taking God to court. and she would tell God to come down. She wants to talk to him. She wants to take him to court. And she would come up with all the good things my grandfather did and my father did. And then she would want an answer why we are there. And this became sort of like a play for evening entertainment. We had people who begged us to come. We should let them stay with us and listen to our stories, because it was really unbelievable how a little girl of 13 would tell God how she prayed everything and how good she was and how much charity her parents did and her grandfather, because my grandfather would open the doors before the high holidays and everybody could come and have vegetables, some fruit and whatever they needed. And he would do that for the Christians before Christmas. And she just wanted to know why this happened.
In September 1944, after 5 months at Auschwitz, Mom and her sister and others in her barracks were sent by train to Germany to work in a Volkswagen factory, making ammunition and equipment to assist the German army in their war against the Allies. My mother was assigned to work in the office and was also responsible for cleaning the clothes and shoes of her Nazi captors. After several months, the factory was destroyed by Allied bombing, and by April 1945, the war was now going badly for the Germans. My mom and others were sent by train to the next unknown location, being used as pawns to protect the German army from Allied bombing. As a side note, in the 1990s, my mother was the named plaintiff in a lawsuit against Volkswagen for the use of slave labor. A settlement was won for each impacted, a small settlement that is, but $12 million in total was paid. The next stop was Salzwedel concentration camp, mostly women and political prisoners, and my mom's group were expecting a mass murder of them to happen there. Next slide. At this point, the Germans were in retreat as Allied forces advanced. My mother recalls that on that day, the camp, including all its inhabitants, appeared to be being prepared to be destroyed. German soldiers then fled their posts. The US Army, with 1 tank and 2 soldiers, arrived to liberate the camp. My mother, malnourished and dirty, is in this photo here, and you could see it off to the right, an arrow with a circle around her. After many years of persecution and 15 months captive, my mom was now free. However, she was frightened as to what would come next. Where would she go? What about her family? She had no money, place to live, or clothing. She did have her sister, though, my Aunt Rose, and they survived by their will to protect each other. I believe that my mom was lucky not to actually be from Poland, where Jews were being sent to extermination camp as early as 1940, because it was not likely that someone could manage to survive for 5 years in such a place. It is ultimately believed that 280 to 380,000 Romanian Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Next slide. Here's a picture of my mom's transportation papers giving her the right to travel through Europe. The Allies provided food, medical care, and a place to sleep for my mom and those liberated from the camp. Food quantities were small and increased over time so not to shock the digestive system. After 3 months in Salzwedel, Mom was sent to Hillersleben, which was a German Air Force base during World War II, where the Allied forces were providing lodging, food, and clothing, and examination in a hospital to protect their health. Next slide. Here's a photo of my mother, her sister Rose, an Aunt Frida, and another cousin who's still alive at Hillersleben. The survivors made clothing from sheets and linen from the resort there. Rose is wearing a dress made from a blanket, and my mother is wearing a dress made from a movie curtain. Next slide. Mom traveled by truck and train and hitchhiked to return to Leerdina after a brief stay in Hillersleben to recuperate. On the way, she stayed with her surviving uncle in Sighet, Romania, for several months. And you remember Michael said that his family was also from Sighet, Romania. Not exactly a big town, but a big coincidence. Finally, Mom went to Leerdine after 6 months after the war. Imagine her fear and anxiety of this as to the situation, no idea as to what to expect and who may have survived. When she arrived in Leerdine, she was devastated to learn that no one had returned. Their housekeeper had occupied the family home, which she now claimed as hers, when the Jews left for the ghetto. Can you imagine someone employed by you and living in your own home being so cruel? This housekeeper threatened my mom to leave immediately or the police would be called. Since my mom had no proof that it was the family home and anti-Semitism had not gone away, she left. At this point, her hopes of a return to her past life was crushed. Can you imagine being removed from your comfortable life and have everything taken away? Family, friends, possessions, shelter, and dignity. Later, Mom did learn that her older brother had survived and emigrated to Israel. And Mom then returned to Sighet, where she stayed with the uncle I referred to earlier. Next slide, please. This is a photo of Rose taken after the war. And by the way, she had a very strong resemblance to my mother. And as I told you before, they were together throughout this ordeal, inseparable. Rose was lucky to gain passage to the US in 1949. As you know, there were quotas limiting Jews and others from entering the US. So the opportunity to gain passage was like winning the lottery. My Aunt Rose passed in 1989 at the age of 59. And really, she was a wonderful woman, and I have so many fond memories. And by the way, her son, my first cousin Richard, may be on the phone tonight from California. Next slide, please. Mom met Dad in his hometown of Sighet. Dad was invited to Mom's uncle's house. By the way, this uncle was married to my dad's aunt, and both are included in a family photo that I'll show you in a few moments. And he was introduced to my mom there in the summer of 1945. My dad spent the war years with his brother Shani in forced labor, supporting the needs of the Hungarian army. My father had many adventurous stories of his survival. I recall that in each of the stories he told, he was outsmarting the Germans to survive. A real-life Hogan's hero. They were the types of stories you shared with children to hide them from the facts. What my father did not share was all the atrocities he had witnessed and was forced to clean up after, which were relived by him through his ongoing nightmares throughout his adulthood. My dad never told us what happened to his parents or his brother who died in the Shoah. We believe that theirs was the same experience as my mom's family. Next slide, please. My parents were married with two other couples, including the brother Shani, in Sighet in December 1945, actually on Christmas Day, after a brief engagement. Short engagements were typical, as many had no family and few friends, and having a companion was essential for one's emotional stability. My father bought a bus with money provided by his surviving brother Shani and started a bus line between several local cities. One had to be industrious to find opportunities to make money, since Jews were not being hired by non-Jews due to continued anti-Semitism, and obviously the family business was confiscated and no longer was theirs. Next slide, please. My oldest brother, Jack, was born in December 1946 in Sighet. By September 47, 2.5 years after the war was over, my parents had to leave Sighet due to attacks and threats towards Jews made by the Romanian Communist Party. My parents traveled to Lechfeld in the southeast of Germany. In Lechfeld, they entered a displaced persons camp, a place for homeless refugees of World War II to go until they were able to emigrate or find work. And there were many of these DP camps throughout Europe run by the United Nations and funded by the Allies. My parents were provided food and one room to live, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed. And after several months in one room, my parents were transferred to a house located within the camp, and this was a major improvement. One could come and go from the DP camp as they pleased and were encouraged to find work in the area or elsewhere. My father made alcohol in the basement and sold it on the black market to earn a living. Today, you would call that bootlegging. Next slide, please. Here's a photo of my dad's family. A large group of cousins and my dad's immediate family are shown. Most of those in the photograph did not survive the war and experienced the same fate as my mom's family. And if those are photos on the far right and the top of my grandfather on my paternal side. Next slide, please. 3.5 years after the war, including 18 months in the DP camp, my parents were able to gain access to the US and arrive by ocean on the General Muir, a US Navy transport. They arrived in Boston in November 1949. Arriving in the US with no English, no money, and only the addresses of several relatives, a Jewish relief agency provided temporary housing in a small hotel in New York City that was accepting immigrants. Relatives also pitched in to help. Thus, my parents began to start a new life. While there were immediate challenges, a need for a job, housing, learning the new country and language, they experienced more substantial challenges during World War II and were hopeful that life could only get better. Next slide, please. The next couple of slides are photos of the family, and they provide a message of hope. These were survivors who each went forward with a bit of hard work and a bit of luck and created large families, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Clearly a demonstration of the resiliency of the survivors. And here's a picture of my Uncle Mendy, my mother's older brother, her only brother who survived, and his wife. On the next page, please, next slide, you see a photo of Mendy's family in Israel. So Mendy immigrated to Israel right after the war, and there's his family. He is no longer alive. His wife's somewhere in the picture, but I can't, sitting on the couch in red. Next slide, please. Here's a photo of my dad's brother, Shani, who survived and moved to Israel as well. And the left is Shani with my Aunt Gita, and then his immediate family there. And if we go to the next slide, well, let's go to the next slide after that. There's Shani's family in Israel on the next slide. This is taken at a Seder in my cousin Ellie's home, and Ellie's family and his sister Nuri's family are all there, including my wife and myself and my daughter Liza. And that was probably taken 16 years ago. Let's move back to the prior slide, because I think it's an important point that I want to make. So despite being persecuted for their religion, the families ultimately recommitted to their religion upon gaining their freedom. I never asked my parents that due to their experience, was there a time that they lost their faith? Did they ever put it into question? What does this commitment to faith tell us? Their upbringing had a strong impact despite their Holocaust experience. All were looking to retain some semblance of their former life and maintain a closeness to their departed family members and to honor the memory so that they did not die in vain. So we'll skip forward 2 slides. And here's a photo of our family and my Aunt Rose and her family at my cousin Richard's bar mitzvah. And you could see my mom in the middle and Rose in the middle in the back row. Next slide, please. So remember, I told you about a soldier that liberated my mother's camp, Salzwedel. Well, there's an interesting follow-on story. My father became a carpenter and then a home builder. And on one day during 1959, my dad had a customer for a house that he was building. The customer, Irving Klein, and my father started to talk about their lives, and the customer takes out a photo from his wallet. That photo was of him and the girls on the day Irving liberated Salzwedel. And the photo includes my mother and several cousins. This began a lifelong friendship of our hero, who we all adored. Let's listen to Irving talk about his experience from World War II and the thoughts on hate.
This is Irving Klein, who liberated me. As I remember, he was 7'2", and he said, "Have no fear, Irving is here." And then he told us in Jewish what that meant. Actually, he liberated 6,000 girls that day. And I once told Irving that he who saves one person is like he saves the whole world.
Well,
So
all I
he
can
filled
say-
6,000 worlds.
Listen, darling, it was me and the 44th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron Mechanized, the 9th Army. I can only say this, that I grew up at a time when I saw the German Army walking all over Europe, and if it hadn't been for the Pearl Harbor incident, I don't know what would have happened, because this country was completely isolationist. This country, right now, we're faced with the problem of Bosnia. Nobody gives a damn as other people are being killed, women and children being raped and murdered, and the rest of the world stood by. And as a Jew, there's an old Yiddish saying, "Wenn the shoe quetscht, dem tut weh." Whomsoever the shoe pinches, that's the one that feels it. So as a Jew, I felt it more than the other boys felt it, although they saw some of the atrocities too, and they could hardly believe that human beings can do what they did. War is pretty stupid, and I saw things that I'd like to forget. But basically, human nature is it's hard to believe that people can be so evil.
Next slide, please. So here's a photo of my mom at her 90th birthday with cousins, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. All told, my mom and dad had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and now 10 great-grandchildren, and hopefully the count will continue to grow. Hope, resilience, and a new beginning. Those in the photograph would never have been born without my mom's will to survive and a lot of luck given the difficult circumstances and the hate she experienced. My mom, other survivors, and many of the 6 million were deprived of their youth and the ability to experience a normal life, all because of their heritage. They were all victims of atrocities and evil unconscionable to the human race. Despite all that my mother lived through, the loss of her immediate and extended family, physical and mental torture, the loss of her teenage years, the loss of her security, Mom has maintained an upbeat perspective and is relatively healthy, very healthy for a 94-year-old, despite the nutritional deficiency in her formative years. Next slide, please. I am the youngest of Margaret's 3 children, born in New York in 1956. My older brother Jack is participating, my oldest brother Jack is participating in the Zoom, and unfortunately, our middle brother Ed and our best friend passed in December. I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional about that. Life as a child of a survivor was different from those of my friends that we made in school or our neighborhood. My parents spoke with an accent. My father was not white collar. I had not experienced what it was like to be with a grandparent. I had no context for the life my parents lived in a faraway place. The Holocaust was not discussed, although we did know of the death of our grandparents and my mother's imprisonment. I wonder if this absence of my questioning was due to my own lack of curiosity or was a defense mechanism. The Spielberg Foundation video awoke my curiosity and my mom's willingness to discuss. As a young adult, I recall there was always a sense of fear my mom had as to what was lurking around the corner. Being imprisoned by murderers can do that. Overall, my brothers and I were lucky to experience a relatively happy middle-class lifestyle and were able to take advantage of the opportunities available in the United States. Our parents had effectively hid their experiences, like so many other survivors, to protect their children. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for doing the very best for Jack, Ed, and myself. My interest in exploring my family experience is to memorialize this history so it is not forgotten and for my children, niece, and nephews to know the story. As I said earlier, my dad died in 1988, and while I heard many adventure stories from his childhood and World War II experience, I regret never sitting down to learn his life story, particularly during the war years. A lesson I've learned: do not put off until tomorrow what you can do today. Being the child of persecuted immigrants has supported me and my brothers to be empathetic for those countless refugees now struggling throughout the world. And that ends my presentation.
Thank you so much, Peter. This was incredible. And thank you, Margaret, for being here. It's so incredible and not usual to have a survivor and their child and family here. So thank you both, and thank you for your entire family for being here and for everyone joining today. I did want to open up for Q&A. This is a time for everyone to ask questions, share comments. So I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. And I'd like to first ask, if that's okay, a question to Margaret. So one question, yeah. How did you wake up each day and maintain hope during your time in the camps and imprisonment? I'll just have to unmute you.
And I realized my barracks were next to the crematorium. I lost all hope of survival.
Michael, right? Yeah, so this is a little difficult for Margaret to understand this whole Zoom and to be able to answer the questions as you're asking her. I'm not sure that, you know, Peter had asked her a couple of questions and we, you know, she wrote down her answers. I'm not sure what you just asked her was one of the questions.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So, no, don't be sorry. I'm just saying she's
Sure.
So the second question.
Mama.
I would love to hear anything you could share. So I want to open up the floor to you, Margaret.
Okay. Do you want to share something other than this? Do you want to say something to everybody? Forget these. Do you want to say something?
Well, I really am very thankful that everybody saw this and will understand what we all went through. And it wasn't very easy, but for me to recover from all this hate, but the only thing happened when I had, the faith came back, when it came that I had 3 wonderful children and a healthy one, and it was all mine, and I was free to keep them and go whatever I want, and that was very grateful. Especially, I have a wonderful, wonderful family. I have great, my daughter-in-laws are the most wonderful people I met and understanding ones. And I have here Jill, who is just a wonderful, wonderful person. And I could ask for anything I want to understand what's going on. So therefore now I'm very grateful to God for everything. Even though before I asked God to tell me why he punished us like that, but it must have been for that reason. And to you all, thank you so much for bringing that out to the people to see what somebody went through to survive. Thank you. Thank you, my dear Peter, and thank you.
Malchi.
Here's
Malchi.
Who's that?
Rachel.
Oh, Rachel. That
Rachel.
was
I love you, Malchi.
99 years old.
Yeah, I'm 99.
She said she
You're Esther's daughter.
Don't you?
So that's Margaret's
That's
cousin
Esther.
who's on the Zoom as well with her son, and
Is that
she's
you,
99
Esther?
years old.
That's she was.
She's asking.
Can I say I love you, Malchi?
She
Yeah.
says she loves you, Rachel.
Can I say I love you?
Yes.
Yes,
of course,
A lot of
Rachel.
good
She
wishes
hears
to you and the family.
Rachel is also a survivor. She's Margaret's cousin and she's 99 and she's also a survivor.
Yeah, I'm too old for that. I don't have the courage to do all this, but you people are doing. You're doing a magnificent job. And it should never happen again, ever.
Alibi.
From your mouth.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so happy to hear everyone. And I see so many family members here. I also have my family here. So my father, my mother, my sister, my uncle, and this story, this testimony speaks to us. Holocaust testimonies always resonate, but this was very close, literally to home of my grandparents. And there were a lot of things I didn't ask. I was young, but I look back in hindsight, as Peter was saying with his experience, and kind of wish that I asked these questions before. So I'm so grateful, Peter, for you to illuminate and share, and Elise for helping out with this beautiful presentation. And Margaret, to hear you and to see you just makes me feel like I'm with Alice Diamond again, and hearing your accent, if I may say so. It's beautiful to me. So thank you. Thank you. We're having so many messages of thanks. And again, I want to open the floor. It sounds like my father, it looks like he has his hand raised, so I'm going to allow him to take the floor.
I want to thank you, Margaret and Peter. It was a wonderful, wonderful journey. And I felt like I'm sure Michael told you, I felt like I was on my journey because my father and mother, my father came from Siget, my mother was from Negresh, which is 30 miles on the outskirts of Satmar, and basically the same stories, and it was very touching to me listening to your story. She went through the same thing. My mother got to the camp, and the Polish girls were there. And I always mention this at Michael's presentation that as my mother walked in and the Polish girls were already immune to this, they said, "You see the smoke over there? That's your parents." And that's the way it was. My parents got married in Siget the same way as your parents did, and my father died very young, but same stories. Everything is basically similar, and I just want to thank you. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you, Peter.
You're very welcome. And by the way, my father actually grew up in Satamari. When they moved to Siget, that was like they were moving up to, Park Avenue. They went to Siget.
So I posted about this event in a few Jewish Romanian groups on Facebook, etc. And I believe some people said they may have known your father's family. So that was pretty exciting. So hopefully they're here tonight. I'm not sure if they were able to make it because I believe they're still in Romania. So the time difference might prohibit. So any other questions or comments? So Peter, I'll ask you a question if that's okay. Just your journey going through, as you said, not necessarily hearing testimony growing up, but what this experience was like for you to start learning, gathering, and as you're getting older, becoming an adult, having children, grandchildren, etc. Telling your family's testimony, what is that like for you?
Well, I would say this much. I really regret not having my father's story. And I really regret that. And so, I can't go back, but thinking about that, I had the opportunity to at least watch my mother's Spielberg tape and learn about what was going on. I mean, I knew some of it, but I didn't know all of it. And I knew Irving Klein, and I knew he was very important to the family, but I thought this was really something important for myself to do, not for myself, but for my children and for my brother's children and for future generations. And then obviously for all of us to know this, you know, we thought that this would never happen again. And the world's a scary place, and obviously I hope it doesn't, but we need to keep remembering what happened so it doesn't happen again.
As you said that, it reminds me how Irving's words in the video resonate what's going on right now. Marilyn, I see you have your virtual hand raised. I'll definitely ask you to take the floor.
Can you hear me? Okay, first of all, Peter is my cousin and Malchi is my cousin. Hi, Malchi, it's Petunia. I want to thank you, Peter, because there's a lot of things I never knew. And this really was a wonderful learning experience for all of our family and everyone on this. So you did a wonderful job. And I remember being in your mother's house the day Spielberg was recording her, I think in the garage for the Shoah back in 1995. And I'm so proud of you, Malchi, because it's an important story to tell. And my mother, who's on this, Rachel Grow, who's 99, and Malchi are first cousins. Malchi's mother and my father were brother and sister. And they've all lost everyone in their family. They're the last two of this generation. So they have become like sisters. My mother survived the war with her sister, who was 2 years younger than her, my Aunt Laichu. And I believe Malchi, having a sister 2 years younger, it really helped drive them to make it to the end and survive. My mother always told me having her baby sister pushed her on. And so Malchi and her sister Rose and my mother Rachel and her sister Laichu were all liberated. And now those sisters who were so dear to them are gone. So Malchi and my mother, everyone on this call who's related to Malchi and my mother know that they are like sisters now. And we honor them. And it's amazing, the evil. And Peter, you kept asking such provocative questions, you know, thinking about like the Ukrainians right now. Just imagine one day, here we live in our beautiful worlds, our beautiful lives, probably all of us on this call. Imagine if tomorrow that wasn't the case. If you had to wonder, you know, you had to say goodbye to your parents, or you didn't even get to say goodbye. So you asked and brought up so many questions, and Malchi, your testimony was so provocative. And I know we're all going to walk away from this tonight thinking about a lot. And I just want to send love, and to everyone on this call, whether you're Jewish or not. Malchi explained her family welcomed the Christians in the town. You know, there's hope. We have to have hope in humanity, and not just the worst of humanity. That's all. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn.
So Peter, I want to ask if there are any other final thoughts before we wrap up that you can share to leave us off with.
No, you know, I guess one of the questions for my mom was just, you know, how do you maintain faith? And I sort of talked to this in one of the pictures, one of the slides. How do you maintain faith when you're being persecuted? And how do you, and obviously what she said was she lost her faith, but she still held to the traditions, even in the camps, because that was all they had to remember their past, was the thoughts of family, the holidays, all the good things that they'd experienced. That's what she clung to, despite the fact that, at least for that period of time, she was no longer a believer because of what was going on. And then, you know, how did she regain her belief? Well, she was liberated, so that was a new beginning. She met my father, her husband. She had her sister. She had 3 children, and then all these beautiful grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and that's how she has revived her faith in the religion. And I guess we always have to maintain hope.
Thank you, Peter. I just want to say again, Margaret, thank you so much for sharing your testimony, for being here. Peter, thank you so much for sharing your mother's testimony, to your family for being here this evening, for everyone here showing up to this testimony. And I can't thank you enough. This was incredible for me. I know it was incredible.
So Michael, if I could just ask one question of you. I'm
Sure.
Esther Kind, I'm Peter's
Hi,
wife.
Esther.
And my parents are also survivors. My parents were from Poland. And I've been saying to Peter in recent months that growing up, I always heard the stories, but it was something that happened in another world in the olden days, in another weird place, had nothing to do with my growing up here in Queens and my life. But now I'm watching what's going on in the world, and I'm watching all the anti-Semitism every day, the atrocities. Nobody's doing anything. And I say to Peter, what are we doing? Is this what our families were doing in Europe in the 1930s? They were, watching the news and going, oh, that's terrible, and then just going on with their business. And it's really terrifying. And I think that being children of survivors, and you can probably relate to this, you understand what happens on a very real level when the world turns against you. And I just wonder, since you're involved with the Holocaust Education Center, what, if anything, do you think we can do about it, instead of just doing maybe what our grandparents and great-grandparents did, which is hope it passes, like Peter said, just hope it passes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we all can ponder that forever and have discussion. I think that's so important. I think that's part of combating Jew hatred is having a conversation about it with other Jews and other people as well. And one thing that I think needs to be a part of Holocaust education, and I always say this, is that Holocaust education is not just about the Holocaust, right? This is just one example of Jew hatred, and Jew hatred is so much older than the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism itself is a new word. In 1879, I believe it was coined by an anti-Semite. Not knowing these things about how these terms came about, the history of anti-Semitism, but more importantly, the history of the Jewish people, I think that's how you combat anti-Semitism and Jew hatred and learn about the Holocaust. We don't just learn about 1939 to 1945. We learn what led up to the Holocaust, and we learn about Jewish history. And this is for all people, but the other way that I believe we combat anti-Semitism is foster Jewish pride. I work at a Hebrew school, and that's one of the things that I love about working there, is working with young Jewish people who I can educate and learn with about Jewish history. And a lot of times these stories from thousands of years ago resonate with what happened centuries, decades ago, and also today. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's how I like to, that's the place I come into this conversation with, is fostering understanding of who we are as a people, Jewish pride, and also knowing more than just those 1939 to 1945, those 5-6 years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, in closing, I'd like to thank you again, Michael, for giving me the opportunity and for providing this opportunity for all of us. And I'd really, again, another shout out to Elise Friedman, because without her, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do this tonight. So Elise, you're a peach. Thank you.
And connecting us. Elise, that was beautiful.
And
to have
being
a
a
chance.
matchmaker.
Yeah, being a matchmaker. This was incredible. And that's what I think is so important about these programs, is the connections that we make. This is, it just made my life more meaningful. So I thank you, everyone. So with that, yeah.
Michael.
Yes, Eddie, my wonderful father and my mother. Lori.
Essa, I ask the same thing that you do. I think about it day and night. I don't sleep because of it. And I say, how can we do something about it? No matter what sometimes we do or say, it's like talking to the wall. People feel what they feel, and it's like they have their opinions. They don't have the facts. I think we have to just keep talking and putting things out there about facts when people keep talking about myths and stories and things that are not true, especially about Israel. I do believe that's become the new Jew hatred when people say, we don't hate the Jews, we just don't like Israel. And the standards that they have for this particular country are full of blood libels like they had for the Jews in itself. And I think we have to constantly talk about facts, put it out there, whether we write, whether we discuss with people, and not let the lies and the myths and the ridiculous stories get out of hand, which it is from all sides, not just the right, but actually from the left and very educated, cultured people. And the media in itself is promoting tremendous, tremendous lies and hatred, and it's creating more issues. So I think about it all the time like you do, you know, I just do.
And with that, that's a perfect example of educating your children. My mother and father, they didn't throw things down my throat, force feed me. They challenged me with my beliefs and just educated me and said, learn about this. And I think that's something that's so important to do, is allow people to think for themselves, but also challenge what they're thinking. That's part of education, is those conversations and dialogue. So again, thank you everyone for being here and for making this such a meaningful conversation. Have a wonderful evening. And I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. April 23rd is our next event. Have a good night. Thank you, Peter, Margaret, and family. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.